when a devoted single dad stumbled upon his ex-wife, begging on the streets. What he did next would change both their lives forever. Marcus had always been a man who believed in routine. Every evening after a long day at work, he would take a walk through the streets near his apartment. It was a way for him to clear his mind, think about his young son, and plan for the next day. That particular evening, the air was crisp, and the fading sunlight cast long shadows on the pavement. The streets were quiet, the usual hum of traffic subdued, as if the city itself was winding down. Marcus walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, thinking about dinner and whether his son, little Jordan, would have finished his homework by the time he got home. As he turned a familiar corner, he noticed something that made him freeze in his tracks. On the edge of the sidewalk, curled up on a thin blanket, was a woman. At first, he thought he might be mistaken, but as he looked closer, the world seemed to tilt slightly. The face was familiar. It was Latoya, his ex-wife, the woman he had once shared his life with, the mother of his child, was sitting there with her head down, a small cardboard sign in her hands, asking for help. Her clothes were worn, her hair tangled, and the proud, confident woman, he remembered, had vanished into someone fragile and broken by circumstances he couldn't yet understand. Marcus felt a sudden rush of emotions. Shock hit him first. His heart pounded in his chest, and he instinctively took a step closer, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. It didn't make sense. Latoya had always been independent, strong, capable of handling anything life threw at her. And now, here she was, reduced to begging on the street. Part of him wanted to look away, to pretend he hadn't seen her, because accepting it was too painful. But another part of him knew he couldn't just walk past. This was the woman he had loved, the mother of his son, the person who had once been his everything. He stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to approach or simply observe. Memories of their time together flooded back. He remembered the day they had moved into their first apartment together. How excited they had been to start their life, how they had dreamed of a future filled with happiness. He thought about their wedding day, Latoya in her beautiful white dress, smiling in a way that had made his heart swell. He thought about the late nights they had spent talking about their hopes and fears, the times they had laughed until their stomachs hurt, and the times they had argued, fiercely, but always believing they would work things out. And then his mind wandered to the darker memories, the fights that had grown more frequent, the misunderstandings that seemed impossible to resolve, the gradual drifting apart that had led them to the painful decision to separate. He remembered the day she left, the quiet sadness in Jordan's eyes, and the awkward, tense conversations about custody and responsibility. At the time, he had felt a mix of relief and heartbreak, thinking that maybe this was the best solution for everyone involved. He had imagined that she would go on to build her life, find stability and happiness, just as he was trying to do now, seeing her like this. Marcus felt a deep pang of guilt and helplessness. He wondered what had gone wrong. What series of events had brought Latoya to this point? Was it bad luck, a string of unfortunate choices, or circumstances beyond her control? He didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. He felt a mix of pity and anger-pity for the suffering she was experiencing, and anger at a world that could be so cruel. Or perhaps anger at himself for not being there in some way to prevent this. Marcus watched her for a few moments, noticing the small, trembling movements as she shifted to get more comfortable on the cold pavement. Her eyes were downcast, and she seemed unaware of him standing there. There was a vulnerability in her posture, a silent plea that spoke louder than words ever could. He felt a lump in his throat and a tightness in his chest that made it hard to breathe. It was as if he had been hit with a sudden wave of realization. Life was fragile, unpredictable, and even the strongest people could fall when circumstances became too much to bear. Finally, he took a cautious step forward. His instincts told him to speak, to ask if she was okay, but his mind raced with uncertainty. How would she react? Would she be embarrassed, angry, or grateful? The thought of her pride being wounded made him pause, but he knew he couldn't turn away. Not when someone he cared about so deeply was in pain. As he approached, He noticed the cardboard sign in her hands more clearly. The letters were messy, scrawled in haste. "Anything helps." "Thank you." His heart sank further. He thought about the many nights he had spent worrying about providing for Jordan, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices he had made. And now here was Latoya, once so capable, reduced to asking strangers for help. The sight was almost unbearable, yet it sparked a deep, human empathy within him. He stopped just a few feet away, watching her struggle to stay warm and wondering what to say first. He knew that one word, one gesture, could make a difference. He also knew that whatever he did next would change things forever, either creating a bridge for her to rebuild her life, or reinforcing the gap that had already formed between them over the years. Marcus's thoughts turned briefly to Jordan. How would his son react if he knew his mother was in this state? He felt a surge of protective instinct, not just for his son, but for the woman who had once been his partner. The realization hit him that life was full of unexpected challenges, and sometimes the people we care about most need help in ways we never imagined. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. There was no easy way to approach this, no perfect words to erase months of hardship, but he knew he couldn't leave her there. Not tonight. The world was harsh, and it had already taken so much from her. If he could offer even a small measure of comfort, a chance to feel human again, he had to try. And so, with a mixture of fear, compassion, and determination, Marcus stepped closer, ready to face the moment that would mark the beginning of an unexpected chapter in both their lives. He opened his mouth to speak, uncertain of the words, but certain of the intention to help to connect. To remind Latoya that she was not completely alone in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. Marcus took a careful step closer, his heart heavy with worry and confusion. Latoya didn't look up at first. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground, her fingers twisting the edges of the cardboard sign she held. The sound of his footsteps made her flinch slightly, and for a moment he feared she would turn away, refusing to acknowledge him. But then, slowly, she lifted her head, and their eyes met. There was a flash of recognition mixed with shock, embarrassment, and a deep sadness that seemed to weigh down her entire frame. Marcus could see the lines of struggle etched on her face, the fatigue in her eyes, the way her body seemed smaller, almost defeated. He felt a lump in his throat. He hesitated, unsure how to start. Words seemed inadequate, but he forced himself to speak. "Latoya." His voice was low, steady, but carried the tremor of emotion he couldn't hide. She blinked, her lips parting slightly, as if she wanted to speak, but didn't know what to say. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable, yet charged with the weight of their shared past. Marcus could see that pride was still alive in her, though it had been battered and bruised. He knew she wouldn't want to appear weak, even now. Even in front of him. Latoya's voice was barely audible when she finally spoke. "Marcus, I didn't expect." Her words trailed off, her embarrassment evident. She looked away, tugging her thin blanket closer around her shoulders. Marcus felt a pang of sadness. She had always been proud, confident, and self-reliant. And now life had forced her into a position she had never imagined. It was hard to reconcile the strong woman he had known with the fragile figure before him. He knelt down slightly to be at her level, trying not to scare her, trying to offer a sense of calm and safety. "I didn't expect to see you here," he admitted softly. I want to understand. Can you tell me what happened?" Latoya's eyes welled up, but she blinked quickly, forcing the tears back. Pride and shame battled inside her, but eventually, she took a shaky breath and began to explain. She told him about losing her job. A job she had worked at for years and had loved, and how quickly things had spiraled out of control after that. Rent had gone unpaid, bills had piled up, and every time she thought she had a solution, another problem would appear. Her phone had been disconnected, her savings drained, and eventually she had nowhere else to turn. She had tried asking friends for help, but most were caught up in their own struggles. Every day had become a challenge just to survive. Marcus listened silently, feeling a mix of sorrow and disbelief. It was hard to imagine the series of misfortunes that had brought her here, but hearing her story, he realized how easily life could turn cruel as she spoke. Marcus reflected on their shared past. He thought about the times when they had faced difficulties together, arguments about money, the stress of trying to build a future while managing everyday life. He remembered how they had once dreamed of stability and security, believing they could handle anything together. Now he could see how circumstances had overwhelmed her, how her independence had been stripped away by a relentless series of challenges. Marcus felt a growing sense of guilt. He wondered if there was something he could have done differently, some way he could have helped, even after their separation. The thought that he might have unknowingly contributed to her downfall made his chest tighten. But alongside the guilt was compassion, a deep, instinctive desire to protect and support her. Even though their romantic relationship had ended long ago, LaToya's story was heartbreaking. She spoke about nights spent hungry, the humiliation of asking strangers for help, and the fear of being judged by those around her. She admitted that she had cried herself to sleep many times, feeling hopeless and alone. Marcus could see the pain in her eyes, and it hit him hard. The strong, independent woman he had known had been broken down by life's harshness, and it was clear that she needed someone she could trust. He reached out gently, placing a hand near hers but not touching, giving her space to decide if she wanted comfort. "LaToya, you don't have to face this alone," he said softly. "I can help if you let me." She looked at him, her pride warring with the relief that washed over her. She had been surviving on her own for so long, and admitting she needed help felt like failure. But the exhaustion in her eyes betrayed her resolve. She hesitated, her fingers trembling as they gripped the cardboard sign. Before finally nodding, Marcus helped her to her feet, offering support as they walked a few blocks to a small diner where they could sit and talk more comfortably. The warmth of the diner was a relief after the cold streets, and the smell of coffee and fried food was comforting. LaToya ordered a simple meal, her hand shaking slightly as she took her first sip of hot coffee in hours. Marcus watched her, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. He knew that this was only the beginning of a difficult journey, but it was a first step toward recovery. Over the next hour, they talked more openly. Marcus asked questions, not in a judgmental way, but with genuine concern. LaToya explained the mistakes she had made, the bad luck that had compounded over time, in the moments when she had felt completely hopeless. Marcus listened patiently, sometimes interjecting gently with encouragement, reminding her that she had strength she might not even realize. He spoke about resilience, about the importance of taking small steps to regain control, and about the people who could support her along the way. He could see the conflict in her expression, the mix of shame, relief, and cautious hope. Marcus knew that rebuilding would not be easy. It would take time, patience, and effort from both of them. But he also knew that this moment, this conversation, was crucial. By acknowledging her struggles and offering help without judgment, he was giving her a chance to reclaim her life. When they finally left the diner, the sky had darkened and the streets were quiet. Marcus offered to walk her back to a safe place where she could rest. LaToya accepted, grateful, but still wary. She had been hurt by life's unpredictability and by the loss of control over her circumstances. But for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Marcus felt it too, a fragile but undeniable sense that maybe, together, they could navigate the path forward. That night, as they parted ways, Marcus knew that the encounter on the street was more than a chance meeting. It was a wake-up call, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of compassion. LaToya had been broken by circumstances, but she was still human, still capable of recovery. And Marcus, despite his own struggles as a single father, realized that offering help to someone he cared about was not just an obligation, but a privilege. Marcus could not stop thinking about LaToya after that night. Seeing her in such a vulnerable state had shaken him more than he expected. The image of her shivering on the street haunted him, and he knew he had to do more than just offer a kind word or a hot meal. He needed to find a way to help her get back on her feet, not just for her sake, but for the sake of their son, Jordan, and the bond that had always tied them together. He understood that trust would need time to rebuild, but he was willing to take the first step. The next morning, Marcus started by calling a few local charities and organizations that helped people in crisis. He asked questions about programs that offered temporary shelter, food assistance, and job support. Each call left him feeling a mix of hope and urgency. Hope, because he knew help existed, and urgency, because he knew LaToya could not survive long on the streets. He realized that helping her would not be easy. It would require patience, understanding, and a willingness to face the emotional challenges that came with supporting someone he had loved and once shared a life with later that day. Marcus went to pick up LaToya from a temporary shelter he had arranged. When he saw her waiting there, bundled in a coat too big for her frame, he felt a mixture of relief and concern. She looked tired but slightly more at ease than when he had found her on the street. The brief smile she gave him was small, but it spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of his effort and her cautious hope. As he helped her into his car, he felt a surge of determination. He was going to do everything he could to help her regain stability. Their first stop was his apartment. Marcus had spent the morning cleaning, preparing a small space for her to stay temporarily. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, safe, and private. LaToya looked around, her eyes wide, taking in the clean floors. The blankets neatly folded on the couch, and the small kitchen stocked with simple groceries. She hesitated at first, clearly struggling with pride and embarrassment, but she eventually nodded, quietly expressing her gratitude. Marcus offered her a cup of tea and encouraged her to rest. The atmosphere was awkward, but filled with a sense of possibility. It's an unspoken agreement that this was the beginning of rebuilding. Over the next few days, Marcus focused on helping LaToya regain some normalcy. He encouraged her to shower, rest, and eat properly, things she had been unable to do consistently while living on the streets. At first she moved slowly, hesitant and wary, as though every action required careful thought and consideration. Marcus understood. Rebuilding confidence and dignity was not something that could be rushed. He offered gentle support, helping her navigate tasks that might have once been simple but now felt overwhelming as LaToya settled in. They began discussing long-term solutions. Marcus had researched job programs, financial planning assistance, and community support groups. He presented these options to her not as directives, but as opportunities. "We don't have to fix everything at once," he said, "but we can start taking small steps, one at a time." LaToya nodded, and Marcus could see a flicker of determination in her eyes. She was still fragile, but she was willing to try. One of the first challenges they faced was finding LaToya a job. She had once worked in an office, but her skills were slightly outdated, and she had been out of work for some time. Marcus helped her update her resume, practice interview questions, and navigate job applications online. There were setbacks, employers who turned her down, applications lost in the system, but Marcus remained patient and encouraging. "It's not failure," he told her repeatedly. "It's just part of the process." Slowly, LaToya began to regain confidence. Each small success, a returned call, a positive interview, completed application, helped rebuild her self-esteem at the same time. Marcus helped LaToya address her emotional wounds. They spent long evenings talking, sometimes about their past, sometimes about the future. LaToya shared her regrets, the mistakes she had made, and the fear she had felt during her time on the streets. Marcus listened without judgment, offering empathy and understanding. It was not always easy. There were moments of tension, moments when old wounds resurfaced, moments when pride and frustration clashed. But through it all, they maintained a connection rooted in shared history and genuine care. Marcus also helped LaToya reconnect with resources in the community. He introduced her to support groups for women rebuilding their lives after hardship and encouraged her to attend workshops on financial literacy and employment. At first, LaToya was hesitant, unsure if she belonged or if she could keep up. But Marcus reminded her gently, "You deserve this. You're capable. Let's take it one step at a time." Gradually, she began participating, finding encouragement in the stories of others who had faced struggles similar to hers. The sense of community gave her strength she hadn't realized she still possessed. Throughout this process, Marcus saw changes in LaToya. Her posture improved, her eyes regained a spark of life, and her laughter, once rare, began to return in small moments. She started to take pride in small accomplishments, preparing a meal, handling a simple financial task, or getting positive feedback from a job interview. Marcus marveled at her resilience, the same resilience that had once drawn him to her years ago. He realized that helping her was not about taking control of her life, but about supporting her as she reclaimed it for herself. At the same time, Marcus faced his own emotional journey. Helping LaToya brought up complex feelings, memories of love, hurt, disappointment, and hope. He had to balance his desire to support her with his responsibility as a single father to Jordan. There were times when he felt overwhelmed, uncertain if he could handle the emotional load. But each small step forward reminded him why it mattered. He saw that compassion could coexist with caution, that caring for someone did not mean losing oneself. As weeks turned into months, LaToya began to regain independence. She started a part-time job, slowly rebuilding her finances. Marcus helped her set up a budget, track expenses, and save small amounts. He continued to provide emotional support, but he also encouraged her to take ownership of her life. The relationship between them evolved, no longer romantic, but rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and shared history. Marcus realized that helping LaToya was not about rekindling their past love, but about honoring her strength and humanity. The journey was far from over. But both Marcus and LaToya had learned important lessons. She had learned to trust again, to accept help, and to believe in her own resilience. Marcus had learned the power of compassion, patience, and forgiveness, not just for others, but for himself. Their connection deepened, not as lovers, but as two people who had endured hardship and had chosen to help each other rise above it. Through this journey, Marcus understood something profound. Life could break people in ways they never imagined, but it could also provide opportunities for healing, growth, and connection. He realized that helping someone in need was not a burden, but a chance to witness the strength of the human spirit and the quiet power of empathy. The days following LaToya's first steps toward stability were filled with small victories, but also unexpected struggles. Marcus had hoped that once she had a place to stay and some support, life would become easier. But he quickly realized that rebuilding a life from the ground up was never simple. Each day presented new challenges, some logistical, like figuring out transportation to her new job, and some deeply personal, like dealing with the lingering shame and fear that had haunted LaToya since she had hit rock bottom. Marcus watched her closely, noticing the little things that signaled progress, the way she greeted him with a slightly more confident smile each morning, how she began preparing simple meals in the apartment kitchen, and how she kept track of her small earnings from her part-time job. But there were setbacks too. LaToya sometimes slept through alarms, or missed appointments, or let her anxiety spiral, fearing that she wasn't moving fast enough to recover. Marcus reminded himself to be patient, remembering that healing was not a straight line. Each stumble was not a failure, but an opportunity to learn and regain momentum. One afternoon, Marcus came home from work to find LaToya sitting at the small dining table. Surrounded by a pile of forms and documents, she looked frustrated and exhausted. "I just don't understand this paperwork," she said, her voice tight. "It's too complicated, and I keep making mistakes." Marcus sat down beside her and gently guided her through each step. They filled out applications together, discussed her rights, and broke down each task into manageable pieces. It was slow work, but Marcus realized that this process, though tedious, was teaching LaToya patience and the confidence to handle her life again. At the same time, Marcus helped her deal with practical challenges. They visited a social worker who helped LaToya apply for additional support, such as food assistance and temporary financial aid. They also looked for affordable childcare options for Jordan, so he could spend time with her without disrupting his school schedule. Marcus was careful not to overstep, allowing LaToya to make her own decisions whenever possible, but offering guidance whenever she asked. Slowly, she began to take initiative, asking questions, suggesting solutions, and making small decisions on her own. There were moments of tension between them too. Old memories and unresolved emotions sometimes surfaced, making conversations tense. LaToya occasionally felt judged or pressured, and Marcus struggled with feelings of guilt and frustration over their past. But each difficult conversation was followed by reflection, apologies, and deeper understanding. Marcus realized that part of rebuilding a life wasn't just about finances or jobs. It was about rebuilding trust, emotional resilience, and a sense of self-worth. One of the biggest milestones came when LaToya started attending workshops designed to improve job skills. At first, she was nervous, unsure if she belonged among people she didn't know. Marcus encouraged her to take it step by step, reminding her that everyone starts somewhere, and that learning was part of the process. Gradually, LaToya began to open up in these workshops, asking questions, sharing her experiences, and learning from others. Each session made her more confident, and she started applying her new skills to her work and personal life. Marcus also noticed that LaToya's attitude toward life began to shift. She started keeping a small journal, writing down her thoughts, her goals, and the things she was grateful for. Marcus encouraged her to set short-term and long-term goals, celebrating even the smallest achievements, like paying a bill on time or completing a task at work. These small successes became the building blocks of her confidence, and Marcus could see her beginning to believe in herself again. Throughout this period, Marcus balanced his support for LaToya with his responsibilities as a single father. Jordan's presence was both a joy and a challenge, as Marcus wanted to ensure that his son felt secure and loved even amidst the changes at home. Surprisingly, Jordan became a source of motivation for LaToya. She wanted to show him that she could take responsibility, rebuild her life, and be someone he could look up to. Their interactions were sometimes awkward at first as they navigated their new roles. But over time, a tentative bond began to form. Built on mutual care and shared understanding, there were setbacks that tested both Marcus and LaToya. A day came when LaToya received a rejection from a job she had been excited about. She broke down in tears, feeling the weight of her failures. Marcus held her, offering comfort, and reminded her gently that setbacks were part of life. "You've come so far," he said. "One rejection doesn't erase all the progress you've made. Keep going. You're stronger than you think." Slowly, she wiped her tears and began to focus on the next opportunity. Marcus admired her resilience and realized that this journey was as much about inner strength as it was about practical stability. As weeks turned into months, Marcus and LaToya developed a rhythm. Mornings were filled with small tasks, afternoons with work or appointments, and evenings with quiet reflection, conversations, or simple routines like cooking dinner together. They celebrated achievements, both big and small, and learned to lean on each other without losing their sense of individuality. Marcus felt a deep sense of pride in LaToya, not just for the progress she was making, but for her courage to face life head-on, despite the hardships she had endured. One day, LaToya received a job offer at a small company that appreciated her skills and work ethic. Marcus was overjoyed, knowing how much this meant to her. The day she started her new job, she stood a little taller, walked a little straighter, smiled more openly than she had in months. Marcus felt a mix of pride, relief, and quiet happiness. He realized that helping someone rise again didn't mean erasing the past, it meant guiding them to find their own path forward and cheering them on as they took each step. By this point, LaToya had begun to regain a sense of independence. She could manage her daily routines, communicate her needs, and take responsibility for her work and personal life. Marcus remained a supportive presence, but he also gave her the space to stand on her own. Their relationship had evolved, no longer defined by romance or past hurts, but by trust, respect, and shared humanity. Marcus recognized that helping her rebuild her life had not only changed her, but it also transformed him, teaching him patience, empathy, and the value of unconditional support. Through it all, Marcus reflected on the journey they had shared. Life had brought them together, torn them apart, and now given them the opportunity to support each other in a different way. He understood that true compassion involved patience, forgiveness, and a willingness to face discomfort for the sake of another person's growth. LaToya had regained her independence, but the connection between them remained a bond forged through hardship, understanding, and mutual care. Marcus knew that the path ahead would not always be smooth. Life would continue to throw challenges their way, and there would be days of doubt, fear, or struggle. But he also knew that they had learned to face these challenges together, with resilience, patience, and compassion. Latoya had learned to trust herself again, and Marcus had learned to trust in the power of empathy and support. Together, they had built a foundation strong enough to face whatever came next. In the end, Marcus realized that helping someone rebuild their life was not just about providing shelter, jobs, or guidance. It was about nurturing hope, restoring dignity, and fostering the belief that life could improve even after the darkest moments. Latoya had risen again, step by step, and in doing so, Marcus discovered that true strength came not only from overcoming hardship, but also from lifting others up along the way. By the time months had passed, Latoya's life had transformed in ways that once seemed impossible. She had a steady job, a small savings account, and the confidence to face challenges she never thought she could overcome. Marcus watched her with a mixture of pride and quiet admiration. The woman he had once known as proud, independent, sometimes stubborn, was still that person at her core. But she had gained a new depth, resilience, patience, and an understanding of her own strength. It was a journey that had tested both of them, but it had also brought growth, healing, and a renewed sense of purpose. Their relationship had shifted as well. It was no longer defined by romance, arguments, or old regrets. Instead, it had evolved into a bond rooted in trust, respect, and genuine care. Marcus realized that he did not need to love Latoya as he once had to support her fully. He could care for her as a human being, someone who had faced hardship and come out stronger on the other side. Latoya, in turn, had learned to rely on others without losing her independence, understanding that accepting help was not a weakness but a step toward rebuilding life. One afternoon, as Marcus and Latoya sat in the small living room of his apartment, they reflected on the journey they had taken together. Latoya smiled softly, the kind of smile that spoke of quiet pride and newfound hope. "I can't believe how far I've come," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "There were times I thought I would never get out of that darkness, but you helped me believe I could." Marcus felt a lump in his throat, his emotions caught between relief, happiness, and a lingering sadness for all the struggles she had endured. He nodded, unable to find the perfect words, but letting his presence and gentle gaze convey everything he felt. Latoya's growth was most evident in how she interacted with her son. She had been distant for months, not because she didn't care, but because her own struggles had consumed her energy and attention. Now, she had the emotional space to be the mother she had always wanted to be. She helped Jordan with his homework, attended school events, and spent quality time with him, showing him that perseverance and courage could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Marcus watched their bond grow and felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that his son was witnessing not just the recovery of his mother, but the power of compassion and human resilience. The neighborhood had begun to notice the changes too. Latoya, once a quiet and struggling figure, now walked with confidence, greeted neighbors warmly, participated in local events. Marcus often found himself smiling quietly at the small transformations. The way she held herself, the way her laughter returned, and the way she carried herself with dignity that had been absent for so long. It was clear that rebuilding a life was not just about financial stability, but also about reclaiming identity, pride, and the ability to interact with the world with self-assurance. Despite the progress, life still had its challenges. There were times when Latoya worried about finances, or felt overwhelmed by the demands of her new job, or doubted whether she could maintain her independence. Marcus remained a steady presence, offering guidance when needed, but allowing her to make her own decisions. He had learned that support was not about controlling outcomes, but about empowering someone to navigate life with confidence. Latoya had become capable of facing problems head-on, and Marcus took pride in knowing that she was no longer defined by past hardships. One evening, after a long day, Marcus, Latoya, and Jordan sat together at the dinner table. The room was filled with a sense of warmth, normalcy, and family. Marcus watched Latoya interact with Jordan, laughing at his jokes, helping him with a tricky math problem, and listening attentively to his stories about school. For Marcus, it was a powerful moment, a reminder that life, even after hardship, could still offer joy, connection, and hope. The experience had changed him deeply, showing him the strength of human resilience and the value of empathy, patience, and unconditional support. LaToya's confidence extended beyond the household. She began participating in community activities, volunteering at local shelters, and sharing her story with others who were struggling. Her journey inspired those around her, demonstrating that even the most difficult circumstances could be overcome with determination, support, and the willingness to accept help. Marcus noticed the pride in her eyes as she spoke to others, the same pride that had been buried under months of struggle. It was a transformation that went far beyond material stability. It was about reclaiming life, purpose, and dignity. Marcus reflected on the changes in both their lives. Helping LaToya had been challenging, emotionally complex, and at times exhausting, but it had also been deeply rewarding. He had learned that compassion required patience, resilience, and a willingness to face difficult truths. He had discovered that offering support was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to humanity's capacity for care and empathy. Watching LaToya rebuild her life, step by step, gave him a profound sense of fulfillment as he realized that the impact of kindness and understanding could ripple far beyond immediate actions. There were moments when Marcus felt a bittersweet ache. Seeing LaToya regain her independence reminded him of what they had lost in their relationship, the love that had faded, and the mistakes that could never be undone. But he also recognized that their bond had evolved into something perhaps even more meaningful, a connection grounded in mutual respect, shared experience, and genuine care. They had moved beyond past grievances and disappointment, and in the process had discovered a deeper, more enduring form of connection. The journey had taught both Marcus and LaToya invaluable lessons. LaToya had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, that asking for help was a sign of strength, and that resilience could be rebuilt even after profound hardship. Marcus had learned that true support required empathy, patience, and trust in the other person's strength. Together, they had discovered that life's challenges could be overcome not in isolation, but through connection, understanding, and the willingness to help others rise after they had fallen. By the end of this chapter of their lives, both Marcus and LaToya had grown in ways they never anticipated. LaToya was no longer defined by the struggles that had once consumed her, but by the courage, determination, and resilience she had shown. Marcus had learned that true strength was not just about facing life's challenges alone, but about lifting others up along the way. Their journey together had been painful, uncertain, and emotional, but it had also been transformative, demonstrating the power of empathy, human connection, and the ability to overcome life's most difficult moments. As LaToya prepared to move into her own small apartment, ready to live independently while maintaining a strong bond with her son, Marcus felt a quiet pride. This was not the end of life's challenges, but it was a milestone, a symbol of survival, growth, and the ability to reclaim one's life after profound hardship. They had shared a journey that neither would forget, and in doing so, had learned the true meaning of resilience, compassion, and human connection in the end. Marcus realized that the encounter on the street months ago had not just changed LaToya's life, had changed his. It had reminded him of the fragility of life, the importance of empathy, and the enduring strength that comes from supporting and believing in others. He understood that helping someone rise after they had fallen was not just an act of kindness. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of compassion. LaToya, standing now with her head held high, smiling at the future she had fought to reclaim, was living proof that life could heal, rebuild, and restore dignity. Marcus knew that neither of them would ever forget the journey, the struggles or the victories, and that their lives, forever intertwined by circumstance, care, and shared history, had been forever enriched by the experience. Together they had turned pain into growth, hardship into hope, and despair into the quiet, enduring strength of a human heart determined to rise again.